So let me start by saying that I'm always surprised when people say that net zero is an imposition from Western government. When this entire net zero debate erupted in the beginning of this year, I found it I was perplexed to hear even the most educated people saying this is a new idea, a new concept that has been pushed to us. They want to stop our development. Well, that's not true. 1992 convention, if one reads 1992 convention, the convention at least 10 places mentions emissions and sink. The science of climate change is clear. Net zero emanates from the science of climate that your emissions will have to be balanced with sink to reach a certain temperature limit. So it is a scientific concept established 30 years back, enshrined in the convention. It is just that now countries are being asked that you have to meet that scientific requirement. In fact, even Paris Agreement, if you look at section 4.1 of Paris Agreement, the operational paragraph of Paris Agreement is about net zero. So I think people who were not prepared for it, that there's something which is going to come up, felt that it was an imposition. The fact is, net zero was always part of United Nations framework discussions for the last 30 years. It was just that we were not prepared for it. As we were not prepared for methane debate at Glasgow, I very strongly believe that India should have taken lead in designing the methane debate rather than giving it to North Americans and Europeans to dictate. And for that matter, even forestry debate. Which country has more stake on forestry than countries of the global south and country like India? We should have steered the forestry debate so that forest-based communities are not hurt, that forest doesn't become a dump yard of carbon that global north is thinking about. But nevertheless, the bottom line is that we were not prepared on net zero a year back. And I don't think we are even prepared now, even when Prime Minister, even when Prime Minister has announced net zero for 2070, I don't think we are institutionally prepared to steer this debate forward, because there is a lot that needs to be done internationally on net zero, and of course, a lot that needs to be done nationally on net zero. Let me come to the international part. The institutional structure for net zero is not ready at UNFCCC. As I said, it is countries coming and announcing that I am going to meet net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070, whatever has fancied their, whatever they have fancied, they have put those numbers on the table. But there are 5 or 6 things that we need to do to actually enshrine it, institutionalize it. The first thing is, if we want to hold countries accountable for net zero, then it has to be enshrined in domestic law. Because see, Paris Agreement is not legally, we cannot hold countries responsible legally under Paris Agreement. So the net zero has to be enshrined in domestic law. So a domestic climate change law has to be enacted by every country, then only their net zero means something. It doesn't make any sense for us to believe what Joe Biden is saying, because unless and until US Senate passes a law, or Congress and Senate passes a law which says, yes, we agree on net zero, maybe in 2024, Donald Trump is back and he throws everything out. So one, that it has to be domestically enshrined in law. That is one. And that we need to, if we think that we have to hold developed countries accountable and hold ourselves accountable, we will have to get domestic law in place. The second thing is net zero has to be now embedded as part of NDC, which means that every 10 years, countries will give their NDC, keeping in view what promise they have made on net zero. So the relationship between NDC and net zero will have to be very, very clearly established. You cannot give an NDC which is not on track for net zero if a country has agreed on net zero. The third is net zero has to be flexible. What I mean by flexibility is that technology is emerging, which will allow many countries to do things much quicker than what they are projecting right now. US is saying, I want to meet net zero by 2050, but there will be technologies and resources available for US to do it maybe by 2045 or maybe by 2040. So net zero cannot be enshrined as something written on stone. It also has to be flexible, and a mechanism has to be developed to see how flexibility in terms of increasing ambition can be embedded. The fourth point is net zero also has to be linked with international finance. The problem with international financial architecture that we see, where if you are the most vulnerable country, or if you are at, your risk is high, you pay the highest cost of capital. There cannot be the biggest injustice of climate change than to ask the most vulnerable countries who have contributed the least to climate change to pay the most to access global capital. So a global financial architecture reform is an essential part of net zero that should also be discussed. And the last part is that net zero also have to be self-differentiated. It doesn't make any sense for US to say that I will do it by 2050. 2050 is what IPCC says that net zero CO2 has to be reached. And 2070, if you take all greenhouse gases together, we have to reach net zero. So the number that countries have put on the table, especially developed countries, they have almost come and grabbed the carbon, so-called carbon space by announcing an end date of net zero. So these are some of the things that are still open for debate, open for negotiation. And I think once India has announced net zero for 2070, we should now be prepared to take this discussion to a logical conclusion, not by saying, yes, I have announced and things are over. Things are not over. Whether we drive the discussion or let developed countries drive the discussion, that is the choice we have. So far, they have driven the discussion. So that's what I wanted to put in front of you, that the institutional architecture of net zero is still to be developed. And we have this space, now that we have announced net zero target, to work on the institutional aspect at international level. And of course, once we have announced 2070 target for ourselves, we will have to start looking at institutional structure domestically as well. And especially climate finance part, which is where I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on how the climate finance look like. One of the things that I have understood, and actually I've understood quite late, that there is a huge disconnect between India's ambition at the global level and India's climate finance requirement. And that disconnect is widening every day. If we sit on G20 table, then as a G20 nation, you are not going to get grant. Grant is out of question. And therefore, though India's requirement is of grant, and when we go to UNFCCC, we say we need grant and we need public grant from developed countries. This is not what we are going to get if we want to sit on UN Security Council, or that's what our ambition is, or if we want to be on G20. That is not where we are going to get grant. So the first thing is that we need to be very clear in our head what climate finance we are talking about. Grant is not what we are going to get. You will get some grant. In fact, I think of if you look at the climate finance over the last few years, we get about 6 to 7% of global climate finance, which is, a few $1 billion. But those are the kind of things that will come. But if we are thinking about large grant coming to India, that is not going to be the case. So if it is about investment, then where should we focus on? How do we get an investment which is just, an investment which will make sure that it does not victimizes us because we are vulnerable, because our financial system is weaker, or our infrastructure to deal with disaster is weaker. That makes us more vulnerable to repay. How do we do it? And answer that I get is that India will have to start working for getting climate finance. And there are a variety of things for which we need money. We will have to seriously start discussion and take leadership on international finance itself. what kind of money will come, from where will come, and what terms and condition it will come. And we should not do it only for ourselves. We should take leadership, because this problem is much more in Africa. I did some work in Tanzania, and one of the reasons why Tanzania was at that point of time, 2 years back, not able to get anything on renewable energy, because the interest rate is 24%. At 24% interest, a diesel generating set is far cheaper than a solar rooftop with battery. But at 6% interest rate, diesel generating set is out. A Tanzanian household can install a solar rooftop with battery and replace diesel. So I think, when we talk about climate finance, I don't think we need to bracket ourselves only in the purview of climate finance, but talk about larger reform in international financial system. That is going to be important for us. Coming back to climate finance, $1 trillion that Prime Minister announced, I'm not sure from where that number has come, but that number, it is only about, if you take $1 million per megawatt renewable, then it is 500 billion. That's half of the money that Prime Minister announced at Glasgow. And then with battery and grid infrastructure and some industrial investment, you can add up to $1 trillion. But this is all mitigation investment. This is all $1 trillion is going to be your mitigation investment going from now till 2030. If we want to set up 500 gigawatt renewable energy and electric vehicle and other transformation that we are talking about, it is not adaptation money, or for that matter, just transition money. If we want Jharkhand to close coal mines, then Jharkhand has to be provided an alternative industries to come there, or alternative economic activities to happen. And that is going to require far more money than $1 trillion that the Prime Minister has announced. So I think the $1 trillion that the Prime Minister has announced is largely about mitigation money, adaptation, resilience infrastructure, just transition money. They do not figure in that. While mitigation money and investment is easy to get, after all, these are profitable venture. India is where companies can make money, and they will come and invest in India. Money will not be available for adaptation. That's where we will have to use our own resources, and we have resources for adaptation, but we will need more adaptation. But I think we will need huge amount of money for just transition. If you look at the energy map of India, currently, our energy areas are Eastern and Central India. But our renewable energy India is Southern and Western India. A transition of net zero will completely change the energy geography of the country, from Eastern and Central India to Western and Southern India. That's where all the resources are. And therefore, we will have, how do you go to Jharkhand and say, I'm going to close your coal mine because it is causing climate change without giving you anything in return? It has huge implication on federalism. So the investment that will be required in this transition is far more than just setting renewable energy and putting battery and doing smart grid. Those are the easier part. The difficult part will come when we have to make investment in adaptation, in infrastructure, and in transitioning and building green economy in coal areas. Those are the areas where we will need far more money. Let me stop here by saying that net zero is an inevitability. If we think that climate change is real, if we think that 1.5 degree is a reasonable target, a lot of people think 2 degrees is fine, and I respect them. They have more risk appetite than what I have. But if we think 1.5 C is where the target has to be, then net zero by 2050, 2060 is inevitable. And I think we need to work for this, make sure that it is just, that it is equitable, and develop institutional structure similarly for that just and equitable transition in India and internationally. Thank you very much.